G'day, folks, and welcome to the Binge Thinker episode 9. My name is Jameel Raymond. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. My first guest in a little while is a friend of mine, a fellow comedian, avid meditator, BJJ enthusiast, Joe Rogan light, but also light brown. Please welcome Bobby Sandhu. Welcome, Bobby. How you doing?
Great to be here, Jameel. Good to see you, brother.
Oh, man, it's good to see you. It's good to see you. Now, you've just come back from a little stint in Austin,
That's right.
flying in the breadth of a pandemic to go do what you do best, which is BJJ. How did you find that? How did you find the experience of that?
That was something else. It really was something. I mean, every day, like I was saying to you earlier before we started, when you're in a foreign country, and especially one that's so far away, walking down the street is a unique experience. It's just so different environment, and also I think your lenses, like you're more attentive to things. Like you go for a drive, you're looking around more because you're trying to take this in. And also, I was very aware of the fact that I'm here for a limited period of time. I'm here for, even though 3 months is not a short period of time, it's going to come to an end. So I need to make the most of this. I've got this really unique experience, unique opportunity, where I'm going to be around some really special people, people who are doing what I want to be doing. They're really making a life and a career and really successful in this sort of field, this area of jiu-jitsu. It's a unique thing. Not that many people are, making a career doing it. So I'm going to be around them to try and take in as much knowledge as possible to engage in skill development for myself. So I had a blast. I've made so many, assumed lifelong friends, and just learned a ton of jiu-jitsu, and learned a ton about Texas and America in general. It's just when you're there, you're immersed in that culture. No textbook can be a substitute for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe actually to take a backward step, I did describe you as a few of those things. How else would you describe yourself to the average person? Like, you do a lot. I call you a Rogan light because you have a lot of the similar interests that Rogan does, and so do I. How else would you describe yourself and who you are?
Well, he's such a tremendous influence, on our culture. And I had the opportunity to see him. He did a set with Ron White at the Vulcan, and grown men who, the last 10 minutes he goes, Q&A, ask me anything.
Yeah.
And this gentleman to my right, I'm on the second level of the Vulcan. He's trying to talk to Rogan. He's Joe, like his voice is breaking. Because Joe's not. He's like the president. It's like 100%. Hinchcliffe went up, all these other acts went up, and it was whatever. And then as Joe's about to come up, the room just sort of starts to fill with these Navy SEAL looking fellas with big arms and tattoos, and it's like, they're patrolling. Even as he's doing stand-up, they're left and right. These guys that are alert, they're not cracking a smile the whole show because Joe he's in that ultra famous category. He's not a regular human being anymore. What he says becomes headlines, and it's really surreal. And it's funny, I'm making fun of that guy, and I was like saying to myself, Bobby, you better not say anything because you'll be the guy whose voice is cracking.
Yeah, man.
I've been listening to that guy since I was probably 12. I've been listening to him for years, and I've no doubt that the ideas he does, because ideas are so powerful, and they can sort of take root in your mind. A particular idea, positive or negative, can almost infect your mind like a virus. Like, to me, I'm sure that the reason I got so into jiu-jitsu, the reason I got so into many of these things is that some part of me thought this is a very valid way for me to spend my time.
Yeah.
Because to get good at jiu-jitsu, just like to get good at anything, you need to spend a lot of time doing that. You need to really be immersed in that environment so that your mind can start thinking in those terms and trying to problem solve and figure out, okay, how am I going to do this? Because it's not an easy thing, and there's many other people out there. Jiu-jitsu especially, to strangle someone, the guy has a very strong incentive not to get strangled. He's not gonna just let you strangle him, and he really wants to strangle you. And there's all sorts of feels very powerful, feels very good to be doing it. Getting drifting from myself a little. I was born in Sydney. I was born in Camperdown Hospital. My family, on my dad's side, my family in India from the Punjab, which is a border state with India and Pakistan. So originally we were in what is now Pakistan.
Yep.
The city was called Lalpur. I think it's Faisalabad now.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1947, the English decided they were going to leave, and they decided to partition the country into a Muslim and a Hindu state.
Yep.
And the Sikhs, prior to partition, prior to the English government, had their own state, a Sikh empire.
Mm-hmm.
It stretched from Tibet to the Khyber Pass. And they decided that they were going to go with the Hindu. Whatever reason, they had a long history of conflict with the Muslims and a lot of tyrannical governments. So they maybe thought they'd be safer with the Hindus, which turned out kind of not to be as things got into the 80s. But we fled. We had to flee from Pakistan because on the Pakistani side there was mass slaughter of non-Muslims, and then on the Indian side there was mass slaughter of Muslims. So they estimate around 1 million people were butchered, by their neighbors. So it's a very strange sort of thing. We know in our village, a village called Simberley, they said they filled up the wells with bodies of people who were murdered. So it's incredibly grotesque times.
Yeah,
unreal. And we basically took over the house of a Muslim family, and I'm sure our lands and houses back there got taken over by Muslims, and then that's where sort of things kicked off. My dad, he had a younger brother, and at the time, as things got into the 80s, there was sort of Hindu-Sikh violence. There was also a bit of a political struggle because the Punjabi people, the Sikhs, have a different language, they have a different religion, different culture, customs, as opposed to the Hindus. And this sort of sectarian divide led to almost like a civil war in the 80s, where the Sikhs wanted to secede and create another state, which was not India, but a different state.
Yep.
And the cops and the military, to sort of crush that, began to do some very brutal things. My dad was taken out of buses and could have been shot. Just had a gun placed on him to say that he was a militant or whatever. But thankfully he was lucky enough to avoid a lot of that. But he realized pretty quickly he had to leave the country. He's a young dude, 18, 19. He was in that sort of military age where he was either going to have to fight, or he could probably kill in the crossfire or whatever, or he could leave and get to somewhere where he could probably set his life up.
Yeah.
So he ended up coming to Australia. He came on a visitor visa, overstayed. Supposed to come here for 6 months or whatever, stayed here for 6 years.
Yeah.
Bob Hawke, God bless him, came out with a law that if you've got an undergraduate degree, you can apply for permanent residency.
Yeah.
Got his permanent residency, and then after 9.5 years, went back to India to see his family and whatnot. My mum's side, on the other hand, my pop, he was a sailor. He somehow just boarded a ship and just decided to figure it out somewhere in Goa, I want to say.
Yeah.
Gets on this ship, and this ship is traveling all over the world. It went through the Gulf Strait during the Iran-Iraq War. There was all sorts of different things going on at the time. And somehow he got to Australia and jumped off and thought this is probably a good place to stay. And he would go on to start a series of Indian restaurants in Newtown and sort of Sydney, the city.
Yeah.
Every business he started failed until the fifth one finally took off. So he's an incredible personality. He's the president of the largest Sikh temple in Sydney, and quite actively involved in the community. And then they took a marriage proposal to my dad, which is a traditional way of doing things.
Right.
Where you come through and you sort of measure family standing and family heritage and wealth and whatnot, and what you guys want to do. And based off of that, they'll sort of match you with someone who's like a suitable match. And it was my mum's cousin they brought the proposal for. And she's in England, but she came through, and my mum came as part of the sort of entourage with the proposal. And my dad saw her and was like, I actually like her, and said that to his brother.
Yeah.
Who brought that up to my dad, and my pop. And my pop thought, you know what, he asked my mom, and they sort of had a couple of meetings after that, and then they decided that they would marry each other. So.
Yeah, it's great. It's a rare occurrence of at least some preference in would you consider a love marriage then, if it was, by choice?
No, it is still arranged. I mean, they still spent. I mean, they weren't allowed to like ever speak without sort of parental like people there,
Mm-hmm.
so it was always very curated in that sense.
Yeah.
That there was like a year or two in between um, them them deciding that they were going to be married and then actually getting married, and I think they had like 2-3 phone calls in that time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure my pop was sitting right there as as they were talking, you know.
Yeah.
So it's very different to the way things are done today, but it's obviously worked. You know, they've been together for a couple of decades now, and sort of that's how I came about. My dad was just he's the most ruthless work ethic, like over 100 hours a week of working.
Yeah.
He was a factory worker. He was a taxi driver, doing all sorts of different things. He ended up getting a corner store, getting his own business with his brother.
Yeah.
And that steadily led to the whole extended family getting into convenience stores, grocery stores, where you know you're making more than you're not just getting a job and this is your wage. There's no longer a ceiling on how much money you can make.
Yeah.
Now it's you're selling these products, you know, and it's on you. You can increase that sale, you know, manyfold.
Yeah.
And that's what he learned is okay. You problem solve. You get a location, you set it up, and you can take something that's generating no revenue to $5,000 a week, $10,000 a week, $20,000 a week, you know, $50,000 a week in sales. Just as long as you understand a good location, you understand which products are going to sell, you understand, you know, specials, buying, all that sort of stuff, marketing.
Sounds like
And
your dad's
you
a
know, it
marketer
was
as well.
yeah, absolutely, and it's different because this is before the sort of social media age when you know marketing it was physical. It was you know having signs outside and leaflet drops and stuff and
Local presence.
yeah, that's right.
I mean, for local businesses, that's still the same way to go. Yeah, you might have a small presence on social media, but you know, for a convenience store, I mean, you know, it's there. The primary value is the convenience, not necessarily the experience. So yeah, but you know, good on him. I think you know, like I've got a Pakistani background. I'm half Filipino, so I understand there's a lot of cultural similarities, right? Like my dad was the only one in his family to not get an arranged marriage because he left Pakistan when he was in his 20s, went to the Qatar army, floated around, and then came to Australia, met my mum in '89. They got married that year, but you know, my dad's married my mum to stay in the country. You know, it's not So it's not quite the love marriage that everyone envisions for themselves either, right?
Yeah.
And then I came along, so you know, it's different.
Wow.
So
he was in the Qatar military.
He was.
How long were you doing that?
Well, I was in the Navy for a while. I can't remember, but at least a few years. He used to be part of a unit that would deploy and look after cruise missiles. Like,
okay, incredible.
Yeah, so he did that for a while, but I mean, he hated it, but he wanted to get out of Pakistan.
Yeah, of course.
But he was like terribly seasick, but it got him to see the world, and he got to go to Qatar, and he used to go to France, and you know,
amazing.
Yeah, you know, you don't really get that as a Paki in the 70s and 80s, right? So, and none of you're either usually going to Dubai or Qatar or another Islamic country if you're lucky to get a job in the white collars, because if you're doing blue collar in Middle East as a Paki, that is not good, you know. And you would know the same. Indians in Dubai, they are fifth class citizens. It's terrible. So, you know, this is definitely the lucky country for where I am, and you know, from my parents' experiences.
I can never really lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Every time I go to a 7-Eleven, I see another bloke, you know, looks just like me. I always have a chat in Punjabi or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's no reason that couldn't be me.
Yeah. Exactly.
There's no reason instead of doing jiu-jitsu and telling jokes, I could be fucking spending, you know, 10, 12, 14 hours a day just, you know, a zombie-like state. And I mean, once you learn to meditate, it sort of shifts your perspective on those things where you can realize, okay, that's a great opportunity to be mindful. Any experience, no matter how seemingly bad or good, is an opportunity to be mindful. But still, that's not human flourishing.
No,
state, you know?
No, that is the unconsciousness, and you know, but even for them, right? If you talk about your average 7-Eleven worker, presuming they're an Indian descent, they are still, to an extent, breaking the habits and the loops of their existence for the rest of their family just by being
Yeah.
here for that experience. And
Yeah.
that's the level that you enter at, right?
Mm, mm.
So there is still that upward mobility in the experience of it, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
For sure.
I guess it is just a matter of, is this the stepping stone for them to something higher, or is this what they just have to resign themselves into as a temporary
Yeah.
measure whilst they get their degree, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And yeah, sure, we've all done menial things we don't really care for, right? But that's just
Hmm.
the necessity of survival at this point in time.
Absolutely.
And you
Absolutely.
don't,
And there's
no, you go.
there, there's no thing that's all good or all bad.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure there's you can work with a couple of good lads,
Mm,
and just the social interactions you have can be great. Or you have some customers, like when I'm in the shop, there's some customers that just say they light up your day. They come in and, and
yeah.
they might have known you for a long time, and you have a real great relationship
Mm.
that really makes you feel better.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, I've worked in corporate and enterprise for the last 5+ years, and there is definitely loops and there is definitely this
Mm,
unconsciousness that exists because it's such a formal environment that we are not really adapted to. And
yeah.
it is so unnatural, the engagements that occur in that
Hmm.
space.
Hmm.
And even the physical environment to have fluoro and cubicles and all these
Mm,
sorts of things and formalities when you engage with people.
yeah.
But definitely the best part of my job was actually just dealing with customers, getting to know them as people, connecting with them. And it is, yeah, the soul suckiness outside of corporate life. It is the people that you make connections with that make the experience bearable. And we're
Absolutely.
always seeking that in some way. You think about even back to like the slavery days, black people would sing, to calm
Wow.
themselves down, and that's all these tunes and the minstrels of the day. They all came from songs that were made up by slaves um,
Wow.
to soothe themselves, to build community and connection, and it was even a form of communication as well. So
Wow.
we're always trying to you know uplift an experience,
Yes. Yes.
but I mean you can understand why if you're that trapped in a system
Oh
that
yeah.
is denigrating you for all intents and purposes. But
Mm,
even in that there is an opportunity for presence in those moments. But
mm,
it's a challenge. Understandably, it's a challenge, but the opportunity exists nonetheless in every experience, just like we said before.
for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
I began because being raised in that sort of conservative Sikh household, and my parents were still. I mean, my father he sort of cut his hair and took on a lot of the sort of Australian cultural practices and let go of a lot of the Sikh
Hmm.
sort of heritage that he had by not following a lot of those customs for a bit. But then we sort of steadily found ourselves going back to sort of when different Sikh religious leaders and clerics would come out, we would spend time with them, and
Hmm.
we sort of began to reintegrate into that culture again because the sort of Indian community started to grow. So we spent a lot more time at the temple, and I'd adopted a lot of these practices of chanting with beads and reciting scriptures. But at that time, for me, maybe because of how young I was or whatever, I wasn't able to have sort of any special experiences or anything as a result of those practices.
Mm.
I sort of took them on more as just sort of rituals, and to me, it was more sort of an identity thing of I'm a Sikh and this is what I do. And it was still powerful in terms of, having a belief in God and having a belief that, the most omnipotent, omniscient being in the world is my personal friend.
Mm.
This guy gets shit done for me. It's like, knowing Joe Rogan, but it's better. And
Yeah.
that's huge
Mm.
because you think, well, I'm the king of the world.
Yeah.
So that stuff was really interesting. When I was 12, we moved from the sort of Sydney area to the Central Coast, which is about an hour and a half or so now. But back then, it was probably about 2 hours
Yeah.
um, north. And I went from sort of having access to a lot of other Indians and seeing a lot more Indian and sort of being more in that culture to all of a sudden being surrounded by mostly just white people.
Yeah.
And it was really good because now I could sort of see outside of that, and it was like, okay, there's different ways to sort of live life, and there's a lot more available, and there's a lot more going on. I still kept my turban. I wore my turban every day of high school, for another 6 years, and sort of kept on doing a lot of that stuff. When I was at school one time, and I saw a fist fight break out between two football players.
Yeah.
And prior to this, I'd seen like one dude beat the crap out of another dude.
Yep.
Like I'd been at like an Indian fair, and there was some sort of a family dispute. This guy's like on top of another guy, basically in full mount, and just railing sharp punches to the face and blood everywhere. And I remember I'd talk shit to a couple of times to people online, and I thought it's no big deal because there'd be a fight and I'd be the guy and Todd be the other guy up. I never thought I'd be the guy on bottom.
Yeah.
But what was unique about the school fight was it was two football players, both quite athletic people, and it was a contest because they're both flinging punches. They're not skilled strikers or whatever, but they're still very athletic, powerful dudes. And I realized that I definitely wasn't. I hadn't played much sports and, wasn't very strong or athletic or whatever. And I realized if I'm ever in that situation, there's nothing I can do because I just don't have the ability to move my body in that way.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a significant problem that I need a remedy. I already stand out, quite a bit. My skin color, and I'm wearing a turban and doing all this stuff. So I could also, in not the sense that anything can happen. I didn't have too many issues with bullying or whatever, but on occasion, if my dad and I were in public, someone might yell at a racial slur or something.
Yeah.
It was quite rare, but it happened a couple of times, and it's quite jarring especially for a young kid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it was like, damn, I need to learn how to defend myself. This is something to put time into. So I went home and I Googled like world's deadliest martial arts. It came up with like ninjutsu, which is a rubbish. I would have wasted my time if I had done this.
Yeah.
And I rang them up and I said, hey, I want to come learn. They're like, how old are you? I was like 14. They're like, you're too young. And thankfully, that saved me. I'd be nowhere. But on my way to school, there was a big sign and it said like cage fighting or something. And there was a local guy. He was originally a karate guy. He became an MMA promoter and he ran a gym.
Yeah.
And it was just old school, just freaking no light sparring, just guys trying to take each other's heads off. It was nuts.
Just taming the killing beast within.
Just going crazy. These dudes were nuts. People would get knocked out in the sparring. Like it was not. We didn't have all the sort of understanding that we know now.
Yeah.
Head trauma, CTE, all that stuff.
I mean, we knew it was there. I think we just in denial of it more than anything else.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure before it became part of popular culture, like I think there was a Will Smith movie and different things, and all the NFL football players started coming through. But at that time, like when I started, I wasn't aware of. I didn't realize that every time I was hitting someone or they were hitting me, that damage was being done. I didn't understand that, or maybe we just didn't talk about it. Because I remember once I did start learning about it and bringing it up to people didn't want to engage in that conversation with me.
Yeah, right.
They were either very dismissive of the whole idea of it, or they just didn't want to acknowledge that it was a problem.
Yeah.
And even today, I talk to guys. I talk to friends of mine who are fighting. If I ever bring this topic up, they're often like, well, I don't get hit. I'm like, what do you mean you don't get hit? Everyone who strikes, it's like saying I swim and I don't get wet. So it's like people don't want, because it's like, it's like when you want to do something.
Hey, Bob, sorry, scooch in a little bit because the mic's a bit better if you scooch in. Hey,
sweet.
All good.
Yeah, when you want to do something, you find all the reasons for doing it.
Yeah.
And when you often don't want to do something, you just think of a million reasons to not do it, because the mind, like when you, like, it's like so often when I've not gone to bed on time, whatever, but I've got a commitment early in the morning.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, sleep is so valuable. I need to recover. Meanwhile, if sleep was really valuable to me, I would have gone to bed at a reasonable time.
Yeah.
But instead, now it's like, because the mind will always take the easy road. It'll try to, and that's its job, is to avoid pain and go towards pleasure. That's a very powerful conditioning that everyone has. And if you look at it in terms of what will give me overall most pleasure and avoid pain, it's like making better choices, eating healthy as opposed to just eating that whatever chocolate cake or whatever.
Yeah.
But in the short term, it just feels good to eat that chocolate cake. And it feels good to sit on the couch and watch TV.
Yeah.
So it's like, and that's where I guess mindfulness comes in again, is like, is this what it seems to be? Am I not going to the gym because I really am fatigued and I need a day off to recover?
Yeah.
Or am I not going to the gym because I'm just being a pussy?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
And it's like, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've thought about that a lot. And from my perspective, I used to be a very lazy individual. I was obese. I was not a fit kid. I've had to build my fitness. Even now, I'm not much of a fighter. Like I'm definitely physically built, but I'm not a fighter. I do want to get into something like jiu-jitsu or judo or something grappling in the future. I just don't have enough brain bandwidth at the moment with all the things that I'm doing at the moment.
Yeah,
but I do understand the need to be functional in the capabilities of my body. Like I'm functionally strong, but I'm not going to fucking deadlift someone who's trying to take a hit at me. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So,
but that's huge. That's huge, and that's what I was talking about. I was having a chat with a guy yesterday when we were talking about different athletes and people who progress really fast and whatever. And it's like, if you can just get those basic sort of physical attributes, flexibility, strength, mobility, speed, all those different things, then you've got it's like having money.
It's an
having
opportunity.
A lot of money that you can spend it on anything.
Yeah. So
you can spend it on anything.
Yeah, in athletic terms, they call it GPP, which is general physical preparedness.
Wow.
And so there is that general conditioning, awareness, spatial awareness that you can bring into anything. Like I'm not very spatially aware because I was a kid that just sat in front of video games all day. You know what I mean? I've had to, one of the practices that I'm doing now is I'm teaching myself how to do handstands, and that's big.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've been learning on and off for 2 or 3 years, but it's just been self-paced now because I used to go to a gym, but I don't go to that gym anymore. So I just do it myself. But the idea for me was to build balance in my shoulders. I've always had weak shoulders, and then get used to that concept of inverting my spatial awareness. So I feel new levels of spatial awareness in my own body about being upside down, being comfortable in these new physical dimensions. Because I recognized that I had that lack in my life just by being unfit. But to go back to your thing about the mindfulness aspect, because generally, you're absolutely right in that, particularly the ego, or what we perceive to be the ego, your more unconscious parts of your mind, your lizard monkey brain. By default, they are still geared towards survival mode, right? They are still the animal in us. So the ego, or what we perceive it to be, is always going to seek out solutions that conserve energy because we think we live in energy scarcity, and B, take away anything that's not perceived as an immediate threat. One of the biggest skills that I think we need to consciously learn as individuals to succeed is delayed gratification. And, that is a level of mindfulness of being able to perceive what the risks are of this now and the opportunity cost of it now versus later.
Absolutely.
And just like, we were talking about GPP, that delayed gratification is a soft skill that can be, directed into any pursuit within life. And that's, one of the key foundations of discipline is the idea is that, yes, this is going to suck now and not feel as good as the chocolate cake. But I can tell you now, there's people say this saying, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels, which is a bit of an anorexic jab, but I can 100% attest to that. I don't look at food the same that I used to now. Sure, I enjoy food. I'm always going to have a little bit of that fat kid inside me, but I'm eating a kilo of meat per day and I don't care because
that's awesome.
What it enables in my life. By delaying that gratification of the now, it just you see that return on investment. So for me, it's delayed gratification and understanding the compounding effect of these positive changes over time. They are immense.
Immense.
And those are the key differentiators as a soft skill or compatibility that separates the men from the killers, right, from the giants. Is that long-term perspective.
It's not an accident. Success isn't an accident.
No.
There's you could point exactly, this is the reason this person is doing this, and this is the reason this person is doing this on the negative side.
Yeah, and it's easy come, easy go. Like, if particularly when people are overnight successes, A, they're probably not overnight successes. They've just been come into the consciousness of what we perceive to be in that time. And then B, if people do get that, like, they talk about, like, for example, people who win the lottery. People who win the lottery are generally people that don't have these financial management capabilities, and they're usually poor within 3 to 5 years. Same with professionals, like in the NFL, professional sports players, because they just get the immediate gratification. They don't understand how much this is going to last, and they just burn it away.
Yeah.
And, particularly, we were talking about before, you're into jiujitsu and you're into complicated things, but one of the secrets to the journey of enjoyment of the presence is actually the enjoyment of the process itself, and not denying yourself satisfaction in progress in the lieu of getting to a perceived point of victory perception, the other side of who you are. It is actually the development of the pleasure in it now, the mindfulness in the cultivation of skill, versus going, I'm not a fucking blue belt yet. I'm not a purple belt yet. And that's where the success comes in as well, is that why you were successful, because you have put the hours in, you've made the mistakes, you've iterated, and that's what builds that foundational core of centeredness in what you succeed in, I think, as well, is that going,
sure.
I've done the fucking work here. I've earned this.
Correct.
And it's the only way to get lasting and truly gratifying experiences within the pursuit of whatever the hell it is you're doing as well.
For sure. Fulfillment.
Yeah.
And I want to come back to that of a specific sort of pitfall and traps you can fall in with that sort of amygdala-based thinking with jiu-jitsu specifically, how that sort of stuff can hijack and sort of prevent skill development, and it won't happen as correctly.
Yeah.
Going back to being mindful, especially in terms of how mindfulness can sort of help us with delayed gratification. Joseph Goldstein, who, in my opinion, is one of the preeminent mindfulness teachers. He's got a track on Waking Up right now as well. This guy is really, really pivotal in bringing mindfulness to the West, and now he's got a doctorate in psychology as well. So he's bringing together these different mediums for therapeutic sort of benefits and uses.
Yeah.
He recommends noticing, okay, I am feeling desire. I'm feeling a craving. This is a craving. And trying to notice the very moment from which the craving begins. Trying to notice how what it feels like to have this craving. Notice the changes in that craving, because is it becoming more intense? Is it becoming less intense? And also, if you can notice the precise moment in which the craving goes away, because it always does. You're never, irrespective. I mean, a simple way of doing it is to eat the cake and notice what happens.
Yeah.
And that's where that can be mindfulness exercise. But even if you don't eat the cake, it's not like you'll just cake. At some point, the mind will change the subject to something else. And when you're able to do this with good mindfulness, when you can see the beginning, middle changes, and the end of craving, first you realize how good it feels to be free of craving. A very good example is just you're sitting there, especially on retreat, where you're meditating hours and hours, and at the whatever, for 45-minute mark or whatever, you just don't want to be there anymore. This sucks. This is terrible. Your body's aching, and that bell goes ding. So the session is over, and it's like, relief.
Yeah.
But the relief isn't from the bell going.
Yeah.
The relief is from the craving going away. And a mind that's free of craving is a very peaceful mind. So when you're able to see that craving, it has this half-life, and you're able to see, it's like seeing the magic trick. It's like seeing the magician's sleight of hand.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't take you in as much anymore. And you're like, there's craving. There's my old friend. He's back again.
Yeah.
And it's not, you don't form a sort of a conflict, or sort of an aggressive relation, like, fuck craving, I'm going to fucking conquer craving. No, it's like, okay, craving is a natural part, and it's nothing wrong with it. But I'm not going to be
Just watch the cloud pass.
Yeah, you just watch the cloud part. That's a perfect analogy. That's right.
Yeah.
It's going to come. It's there and it's gone, and then that's amazing. And that too is that craving is as free of self as anything else. It's not your craving. If it was your craving, when did you start it?
Yeah. Yeah,
If it's
exactly.
you're the one who's craving. You're not the one who's craving. This is just self. This is just mind, ego.
Yeah.
It's here. It's changing, and then it's gone, like all phenomena.
Yeah.
Mental or physical.
Yeah, but I think the essential part of that is the disidentification of self in the observant state. And a lot of people don't necessarily get that until they've become more avid meditators or they've integrated what that is. That's a certain level 2 or 3 of meditation. For the people that are, the people that are on calm just to understand, why they're doing this, right? They just know that they just know it's good for you, but they don't understand the why and the insight into what it means. And I've actually explained this in a previous podcast, this exact thing. I have an analogy about, which I think is probably Buddhist anyway. It's just that, yes, thoughts are just clouds that are passing in the mind, and the trick is to observe and not attach to them. And that's a continuous practice. And depending on how present and repetitive the thoughts are, depending on your traumatic experience or relationship to them, that's going to affect you in different ways. But the idea is through the observant state, through the meditative state, you disengage from those negative feedback loops. And that's an iterant experience of, taking away from that effect and that attachment to that experience that you have in that emotion. And once you understand that and you almost by default have integrated that into your mind, again, that's another powerful way to be existing.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Yeah. And then also, and if people understood that or could get to that practice, so many things would change. So,
yes.
Because I know that I used to be someone that was highly, highly attached to emotion and anger, dealing with my own traumas, feeling less than. And part of this, the physical is one thing, but the mental to achieve the things that I had previously perceived to be stories and loops in my mind that I couldn't achieve them, they had to be broken mentally to achieve the physical state.
Wow. Absolutely.
But
it's a consequence.
Yeah. I would say it's an incentive. Because consequence has a negative inferment. But
consequence in the sense that the things you say and do, they stem from the things that you believe and think.
Yeah, 100%. It all starts in here and cultivating the mind and the thoughts that formulate around it as well, 100%. Because
this is the beginning of the Dhammapada. It says, mind precedes all things. Mind is their chief. Before I pick up this water bottle, or if there's an intention, I'm thirsty, a feeling, this, and then the action follows.
Yeah.
So it's like going to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
Like I can take an alcoholic and I can take alcohol away from him, and he doesn't have the means to drink alcohol. But so long as he has the desire to drink, I cannot cure his alcoholism.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right.
Or I can put someone who doesn't want to drink alcohol, I could put him in a room full of alcohol. If they don't want to drink it, they're not going to drink it.
Yeah, 100%. And then, so I talked about this in the previous pod, but it's all that, particularly with the things, the external searching for validation or for soothing, that is just a reflection of the wounding of the mind and the state within. And we use that to soothe and try and drown and repress that. Actually, on the previous podcast, I talked about, for example, there's a guy called Dr. Gabor Mate, and he's looked at the nature of addiction and trauma. And the idea is that, we all are traumatized in our own way.
Yeah,
and the means of addiction is to, the primary motivator in addiction is to create the safety from the trauma that we have not processed or is, deeply ingrained in our experience that we are trying to null and soothe. But eventually, unfortunately, if we don't clean those wounds out within ourselves, right, again, that, that state of mind, we're always going to have these negative feedback loops that no matter, it may not be alcohol today. It could be alcohol today. It could be gambling tomorrow. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's that the tool that we use isn't necessarily, it's the poison that infects us externally, but it's not actually doing anything to heal whatever it is internally that is causing us to reach out for that in the first place. So you're absolutely right. It all just does definitely begin with that mind and that intention as well. You were talking
Yeah.
about,
I like that.
sorry, go.
I like that you brought up Gabba Mata, and it's so like that line of no one escapes suffering. You know, like, and
No.
there used to be the traditional pitch for meditation was suffering. You know, the Buddha would be like, "Hey, you're born, you're crying all throughout. You know, your development, as you're growing.
Mm,
There's all this hardship and changing and puberty and adulthood, not to get into adulthood, which is supposed to be the peak. And daily, you're coming into contact with things that are unpleasant,
mm,
and you're getting separated from things that are pleasant. You can't just spend all day with your friends and family doing what you love. No, you have to work, you have to do this.
mm.
You know, there's sickness, old age. There's going to be things that don't go your way. Like in many, no one escapes suffering.
No.
No one escapes losing everybody they love.
Mm,
Everybody is going to have to experience the death of all their loved ones.
mm.
And that's why compassion for self and others is the only logical response in this predicament that we have. Because everyone's in the same predicament.
Yeah, 100%. And then when you recognize that and you focus on those real subliminal experiences that we all carry and value, when you focus on that level in your conscious mind, that's how you influence at scale, right? Because you
Yeah.
relate on that, on those deeper resonances and deeper frequencies of love and joy and compassion and humor, because those are the commonalities in the experience. And that's what, crystallizes in my mind the perception of a singular collective consciousness. Might not be one united as a collective, but
Yes.
they're, just like we're connected right now over the internet via some sort of physical connection, we understand that
Mm-hmm.
there is a metaphysical and emotional, spectrum and connection that connects all of us. And that is practiced in many different ways. Um, and you observe it in many different ways. For like comedy, for example, something that
Yeah.
we share in common. Comedy in the expression of joy is the centralization of ideas and concepts into a punchline, into a common point,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
And you have to take a bunch of different minds with different perspectives to a common, common point to get the same response. And if you can elicit that, that is an art in connection. That is an art in the
Yeah.
expression of connection, and the potency of that. And then that's something that I've observed, just by having a fresher perspective and going back into comedy, is that,
Mm-hmm.
it's a room full of trust. It's a room full of joy.
Yeah.
There is this dominance layer to it that is, it's beautiful in its own way. And that's why I've loved moving from doing comedy less to producing it more, because I
Wow.
still see the value, the presence, the art form, the expression. I don't have to be the person
Yes.
necessarily that is on the stage, because,
Yes. Yes.
similar to the chief, I am the intention behind this experience because I'm the one that
Wow.
puts it together. And
Yes. Yes.
by having that intention and creating this output, that's gratifying. That's really gratifying
Beautiful.
to me. So yeah, I just thought, and what I'd like to do now is by focusing on, these deeper levels of frequency and emotionality. I love to observe how that applies into different social constructs, because no
Mm-hmm.
matter who we are as individuals, we are just people at different wavelengths of reality interacting with each other. No matter what, you can still see these are always connecting us, these experiences.
Yeah.
And yeah, by playing with those and interacting with those and staying at that frequency, you can do a lot more, and you can, create a lot more experience for people, by just being there. It's it's high frequency, but it's low resonance, which is a weird way to put it. It's a high
Okay.
frequency feeling of joy and connection,
Yeah.
but
Mm-hmm.
I think it sits low in our emotional resonance because it's deep, right? We
Yeah.
always talk about depth when it comes to, the power of emotion. It's not like
Mm.
it's shallow and high. It's always that
Yeah. Yeah.
deep, right? Because we're probably accessing parts of our brain and our mind and our heart that have,
Mm-hmm.
had that constant pattern of existence in, genetically identifying those feelings since the dawn of time, since we had conscious thought.
Wow.
And that's my
And
little
deep.
theory about it anyway.
It's interesting. Deep also in the sense that, like, I read one of Thomas Nagel's. He's got like a little short book. I guess it's his ideas for really dumb people, because I'm sure I can't grasp what Nagel's really about. That it was it was just different philosophical questions.
Mm.
And he was talking about, inside. Like, when I'm talking about how I feel inside, I'm not talking about in my body, because you cut up my body and whatever, it's not in there. But I have this rich inner mental experience.
Mm.
But it's kind of hard to place, because like we know, like Sam says, thoughts aren't in any other place than where this freaking bottle and these headphones are.
Mm.
It's all happening in the same place. There's only one place. But so often, because I guess prior to meditation, you just have this sense of there's me, and then I'm in the world, and then there's thoughts in my head, and you're kind of confused about where things are and what's going on, and you're not able to sort of really even truly engage with yourself, because you don't have the means for exploring your inner life, your mental life.
Yeah.
It's like, sometimes I was at this gathering last night, and people are talking about the moon or the oceans and exploring these sort of vast areas of space. And I'm like, guys, what about the mind?
Yeah. 100%.
Like, let's start with exploring our own minds, because that's the same. And when you get into different practices, you do metta, or you do whatever you do them, especially intensively on retreat, you realize, wow, there's incredible potential here.
Yeah.
There's incredible potential for tackling neuroses for really achieving freedom. There's so much potential with these sort of these techniques and strategies.
Yeah, well, the universe is just as deep inside our own minds as it is externally, because it's, we are just that lens between the inner and outer world. We perceive the entire universe in our own minds. So why wouldn't it have the same level of depth in experience and potential?
Wow, absolutely.
So like I've always said, the one of my things is the outside world means nothing to your inner growth. That's one of my biggest takeaways, because I did all this work on myself during lockdowns. So I couldn't go anywhere.
Wow.
I had no choice but to look in. And that's what you find, is that you don't need to solve any of the problems outside, right? Because you are truly just reacting to those experiences over and over again. And that is defined entirely by the scripts and the stories within your own head. So by being able to understand those stories, the stories you tell yourself, understanding those perspectives, you don't need to know sure, it's nice to know what the moon is like. But, before we start to colonize Mars, make sure that the people that we're going to send there have the mind and the capability to, if we're going to literally start again and become multiplanetary, let's make sure that the people that we're taking there have the sound mind, and we're not taking Earth's problems to Mars, right?
That's right. A close friend of mine was he was in Puerto Rico training with the old Danaher Death Squad. That the group that I was training with was kind of an offshoot from that same training club, and these guys, well renowned, produce some of the best UFC and Jiu-Jitsu athletes in the world, and they've got a lot of like wealthy sponsors, and one of them he lent a house. It's like a giant mansion to one of my buddies while he was staying there, because they were going to move to Austin.
Yeah.
And so he's staying in this incredible house. It's, everything you could think of, like an ultra rich place. Like there's, house workers all over the place. He's showing me this table. This table's like, $250,000 or whatever, $20,000 chair. Like, it's outrageous. And I some time went past. I knew he was staying there, and then I hadn't spoken to him. And then I rang him again. I'm like, "Hey, how you doing, dude? You living it up? Fuck, like, I wish I was you."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Bobby, he has quite bad cauliflower ear. I've always been lucky with it.
Yeah.
But from sweat dripping in, particularly during training, he'll get quite severe, very painful ear infections." And he was saying, "Bobby, forget about this house. I've been in agony, right?
Yeah.
Because that's why health issues are a really good way to bring people to mindfulness. Is you realize nothing matters.
Yeah.
Nothing matters when you can't deal with just physical discomfort.
Yeah.
Let alone something like, your business falling apart, your marriage falling apart, having conflict with an immediate family or friend. These things are, or just something not going the way you wanted it, problems in your love. These things are inevitable. It's only a matter of time before another one of these problems pops up. Life is unending series of little issues like this and that. It could be your car tire getting flat. And in that moment, if you don't have mindfulness, if you don't have the ability to manage yourself and deal with it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what else you have going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. There's a great analogy about that. It's like, it's not the obstacles it's not the obstacles in the way that trip you up. It's the rock in your shoe. Right?
Yeah.
It's that constant nagging of self within, right? And that's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's so essential to clear the mind and really work on this stuff because, you're absolutely right. You can be the richest man in the world, but that's all matter, right? That's not the energy that you feel and your perception to it. Doesn't mean a damn thing. And you're absolutely right. Like everything goes away until you're sick. When you're sick, nothing else matters. Priority number one. But the trick to good health when you are not sick is to maintain that priority of self in everything you do because you are yourself and your central self in every dimension of your experience in life. And that's one of the things I've taken away from myself is just, I've got to keep myself in physical and mental condition because if I want to do everything, I'm bringing my whole self into everything. So my physical and mental health is what maintains this container of spirit and that nothing within the emotion or behind the flesh that you're talking about with Sam. And
you gotta look after future Bobby, future Jameel.
Yeah.
Set that guy up. Otherwise, no one else is.
No one else is, man. And
no one else is. There's a great a Thai monk, Ajahn Chah, quite famous. He did a lot of speaking and teaching in the West. Set up monastery. There's even a monastery I stayed at, Wat Buddha Dharma, in the Darug National Park, where there's some very beautiful monks doing a lot of good stuff. He had Jack Cornfield, another famous teacher, with him, who's Ivy League educated and whatnot. He's taken him for a walk in Thailand in the forest, and he sort of points to a large boulder.
Yeah.
And he asks them, he goes, "Is that rock heavy?" And they sort of look around and they go, "It's probably a trick question or whatever." They're like, "Yes." He goes, "Not if you don't pick it up." And so often that's very true of worry, stress, different negative states of mind.
Yeah.
Yes, they're a problem if you engage with them. But if you understand how to leave that rock lying on the ground, and you practice that, again, all this stuff, these are skills, they require practice. And when I was in the US, I wasn't practicing as regularly. I didn't have access to like a Vipassana center like I do on the coast here, so I wasn't going in and doing longer sits, and I didn't do any retreat practice in those few months.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, it's like any skill. Skills are perishable. If you're not, that's why that daily 10 minutes a day is, because it's easy to fool yourself and think, oh, I'm at a certain level. It's like, no, if you're not practicing, you're going to erode your skills. And sure, you'll maintain a certain level if you've done enough practice, but it's like anything. It's like you want to be continually building.
And we're all subject to entropy. In every force, because in matter and energy is always subject to entropy without effort, without force. You talked about your Vipassana stuff. Tell me, because you've done a couple of the 10-day retreats now, haven't you?
So I think I've sat maybe 5 10-day retreats, but then my most recent time, I think June of last year, I spent about 21 days, about 3 weeks. That's probably the longest time.
Right. And tell me about this, because I'm intrigued, man, because I can fucking barely sit there for 10 minutes, and you're sitting there for are they, like you say, a 10-day silent retreat? Like, how silent are we talking here? Like,
Oh yeah, so there's no there's not even you're not even supposed to look at the faces of other yogis,
mm-hmm,
but you have check-ins with your teacher where you would discuss sort of developments in your practice, troubleshoot issues, things that are happening.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like you just go see the guy and be like, yo, I'm having a meltdown here, like, like this is crazy,
Yeah.
And the first course, this is what I tell anyone who's doing this stuff. There's no way to prepare yourself for the first course. I recommend just getting good at sitting for an hour, taking a bunch of mobility stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Get your foam rollers, mobility balls, bands, and learn a bit about mobility, stretching, and stuff, just to work on the body a little bit, because you're gonna get really stiff. There's no way to really avoid the pain. Aside from that, they encourage you to. They say solitude is your strength.
Mm-hmm.
And really confide, go deeper and deeper within yourself. And that's why I don't know. I don't think retreat practice is necessarily for everyone. I think there's certain people, especially if you have, certain mental illnesses, maybe you should speak to a psychologist or someone beforehand, or try to get to a center. There's some places, especially in the US, that also have psychologists and people who are trained in sort of the Vipassana as well as psychology, and they can sort of step in and deal with issues, because like Tim Ferriss had an experience. There can be things popping up, just like with psychedelics, that if not well managed can be quite traumatic and be detrimental. So I think you kind of you look at yourself and you look at, okay, can I manage these hazards? And if you can, and I think they can be managed in that way. Especially, I really recommend the center, the International Meditation Center in Morisset. I believe they have one in Western Australia as well. These are guys who've been practicing. They're all 70s, 80s. They've got decades of practice. They've been going to the jungles of Burma, and they've got that sort of wealth of experience to draw from. But they also, now they've gone away from a lot of the more old school, and the Goenka guys still do this. And, I encourage everyone to try all of them, see what works for them. And they really have the no less than 12 hours a day of hard practice, 3 hours a day of not moving.
Shit.
And they really crack the whip, and it's all about effort. And I think that style of practice, there is definitely a lot of merit to that. Anything you're applying that tremendous amount of effort to, you're going to have breakthroughs. You're going to having incredible insights and stuff. But it's like there's an analogy of a lute player. The Buddha's talking to a lute player of how hard you should be meditating. He said, look, when you have the strings of a lute, you don't want them too loose and you don't want them too tight. There's a perfect sort of balance, and then the lute plays quite well. And I think people have different they have different thresholds, and obviously you need to build up to them. So guys like Sam, who are doing 90-day retreats, doing 3-month retreats, and they're also doing them with some of the best teachers in the world. They can do crazy things like sleep 4 hours a night and practice 18 hours a day. But that's like an Olympic athlete, that's someone like even doing 12 hours a day, doing like in some of these monasteries where you're doing 6 hours a day. Like you said, sitting for 10 minutes is difficult.
Dude, I can't even do this. Honestly, I think the longest I've done is 20 minutes because I just cannot. I just cannot. Like I'm pretty good at clearing the mind and definitely sitting in that observant state.
Excellent.
But it is, but for me, it is just, it's the posture. It is just that fretting of something, needing something to do. And I guess it is that necessity for me, is that like, I don't necessarily, this is a practice of upkeep and observation because, it's not, I'm not trying to, aim towards something. And you shouldn't necessarily, and that's what I wonder is that if you're practicing 12 hours a day, what are you breaking through? Is it just the identification of self? Is it the layers of ego? Is it just general insight into your identity? Like, why are you striving so hard to get to these points?
So there's a momentum effect that takes place when you can tie together multiple moments of mindfulness. So one analogy is when I'm mindful, it's like turning on a light. And then inevitably I become lost in thought. Something happens, the light turns off. And then I remember to be mindful again, and the light is on. So the idea is the longer that I can be mindful, the more likely it is that the light stays on.
Sure.
And when the light stays on for extended periods of time, a momentum effect starts to take place where you're no longer doing the mindfulness as something that you're yourself having to generate. At first, it's efforting. It's quite efforting.
Yeah.
And then you get to this effortless mindfulness.
Yeah.
Dad just popped in.
Mr. Sandhu?
So when that efforting goes away and you get into this very effortless flow of momentum, this momentum it's like a snowball. It gathers more and more and more
Sure.
momentum, and that's when you start accessing some really strange, powerful, very psychedelic like states of experience where all of a sudden you're extremely concentrated and sounds are extremely different. Especially these meditation centers, the way these retreat centers are set up is there'll be a lot of nature. There'll be a lot of roses, particular kinds of flowers. There'll be a lot there's you're not allowed to kill any living being. So there'll be a lot of insects and birds and whatnot. And because I think the animals understand this, that they're not being threatened, just like the deer at Yellowstone. You'll have very strange experiences, like foxes will come right up to you. You can pet them like a dog. So your sensory experience, you will realize, whoa, like the amount of clarity with which you can see reality really shifts. And you'll have a lot of very pleasant, in this particular tradition, the check-ins are 5 at a time. So you'll often hear the experiences of the person before and the person after you, and people report some incredibly powerful experiences. Like complete like psychedelic states, like you would have on a high dose trip of acid or shrooms. But it's just different because it's easy for your mind to be like, okay, I took a drug and this happened. But when this happens completely without any drug, and you realize this is just with these techniques, it's quite different, and it really allows you to really make solid progress.
Yeah. I mean, I've never really certified this with anyone, but I've certainly had states of non-locality during my meditative practice and just in general mindfulness practices. Or even hyper-localization, like the practice of focus on getting to an atomic level of something when you focus on something, and sometimes it just gets sucked in. It's like milliseconds,
Yes.
right? Or you do have that expansion of perception, and then you just have this really broad sense of hearing things and having your awareness of consciousness just gigantically broadens out. So I understand if those are the states that you're talking about, then sure. And then these deeply psychedelic ones, I imagine are in the same scope. But I've never really explored those with anyone in the Buddhist space or the meditative space. I've just had these experiences. Know that heard a concept like glimpsing and non-locality and non-duality. And just been like, okay, I get it. I mean, thankfully I've had these without necessarily having to sit there with a fucking sore back and, have to shut the fuck up for 12 hours because that's one of my hardest things to do.
Yeah. Well, and that's another part of it is like you're really confronting suffering. You're really taking it head on. You're almost you're generating an incredible amount of suffering for yourself. You're also fasting. You're not taking solid food after midday.
Yeah, right.
So you're experiencing a lot of hunger. You're experiencing a lot of there's no social interaction. There's a lot of things where you're generating. This is rapists and murderers are afraid of solitary confinement. And that's what you're putting yourself in. So the fact that you can have a great time, an extremely pleasant time in otherwise extremely unpleasant conditions, that in and of itself is very powerful, and it puts you in a state where you're like, okay, I just handled weeks of that. What else is gonna affect me now? Are they gonna put me in prison? I'll practice.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can I entirely agree with that, and that's something I've thought about within myself. Is that I mean, if lockdowns kept going, if I kept being locked away, it wouldn't necessarily bother me because I have the freedom of state in my mind now.
yeah,
Is going, yeah, sure, I'll just check my own self and enjoy my own presence and just keep pondering the world. And that I know that a lot of people cannot do that. So I'm very
yeah.
fortunate to have that perspective about myself. And that's what all these disconnections and all these distractions are externally, is literally just deferring from the state of presence of mind within over and over again.
Well,
That's what,
that's right.
and yeah, I understand. Yeah, so once you acknowledge and understand that perspective, I think the observation of the suffering and the non-reaction to it becomes an integral part of the practice to be comfortable with the self. But I don't know
Mm.
if that, I mean, you would probably know more than me. Does that translate to the observation of self to heal the process? Or is it just the practice of observing and not being connected or taken in by the pain and the challenge itself?
Yes, yes. Yeah, and look, it is tricky. It's also often there's a pitfall in this style of practice, which is that the rationale is that I am practicing to have this breakthrough in the sense that the breakthrough isn't already here. In the
Mm,
sense that this
mm,
experience right now isn't already perfect. Because in many ways, that almost destroys the logic of this style of practice.
yeah.
Because it's like, I'm already there. I'm already, in a sense, enlightened. Like, consciousness is already free of the problem that I'm seeking to absolve it of.
Mm,
So the trouble is, the people who've had this insight, they still advocate doing lots of practice.
yeah.
The greatest Dzogchen masters, Sam, all these guys, they still advocate a lot of practice, just because of how pervasive the problem of distraction is, and
Yeah.
how much you need to practice to really be able to stay in non-distracted states for an extended period of time.
Mm,
Um, so I guess that's when you need to have that view, sort of overlaying your practice, because then otherwise, like Sam and other practitioners have experienced, it can almost become frustrating because some people, they seem to have this sort of breakthrough with this style of practice. Other people don't, and it's different things for different people. I don't think everyone has to do this. I don't think everyone has to, charge super hard. I've personally had some freaking pretty like crazy things happen where I couldn't meditate anymore, where I was pushing so hard
yeah.
that I felt like something in my mind broke. It was like my bicep gave out on a curl,
Mm,
and all of a sudden I can't even keep my eyes closed for a few seconds.
yeah.
So, you are opening yourself up to, potentially things like that. It's like physical exercise,
Oh, yeah.
Not everyone needs to do a fucking ultra marathon, do 100 miles, but
No.
it's kind of sick to have. I mean, if you're gonna, if you're gonna, if that's something you want to do,
Yeah.
and you adequately prepare yourself, I mean, it's going to be a massive commitment of time and effort. It's going to take away from other things that you're doing.
Mm,
But it's cool. Like I've said to myself before, I'm 30. I'm going to do a 90-day retreat. Um, so a lot of this stuff was kind of like practicing, because up until you do your first 10-day retreat, that's such a huge challenge that it's just like, okay, I need to slowly build up trying to sit for an hour and all that. And then it's like you get to that hour mark, and then it's like, okay, do a 10-day retreat and then do multiple 10 days and maybe
yeah.
do a month, and then it's like what we want to keep pushing. And
Yeah.
I would have to keep reminding myself on my first 10 day. My first 10-day was incredibly tough.
Yeah.
And I don't think I made my progress more than just realize how fucking crazy that I am.
Mm.
That's probably the biggest takeaway from that, was that I'm fucking cooked. Like I have, I have a lot of
Oh,
problems,
yeah. Oh,
like,
yeah. I've been there, man. Yeah.
and I was like, shit, like that was probably the biggest takeaway. And I, like, I would keep reminding myself, people spend 20 years in a cave.
Mm.
Like, this 10 days feels like impossible. Like, and I made sure I got dropped there. I didn't have access to a car. I didn't have access to a phone. So I made it
No escape.
almost impossible for me to leave. Yeah. Because I don't know if I had because that 3 week retreat was actually supposed to be a month retreat,
Right.
and I was fortunate where I did, after the first 12 days or so were quite challenging, and then I got into this incredible rhythm where I had some incredibly remarkable experiences. I felt like I was on opiates basically all day. I was just, I would experience really strange passages of time,
Mm-hmm.
like these hour-long sittings, which used to be the bane of my existence. I'd close my eyes and it'd be like, I thought they were making a mistake. Like, the sit's over. I thought,
Yeah.
really? Like, it was incredibly powerful.
Mm.
Strange sensations of like feeling dewdrops running. It was strange because I was sitting in a cave overlooking this valley in this monastery
Yeah.
in this national park. It's so remote. It takes, you know, hour. There's two ways to get there. One way is you park your car and you literally trek on a trail.
Right.
The other way is there's another path where you go through like a dirt road, and it's crazy, this place. And then within this place, there's certain paths, and there's this severe incline that it goes into the mouth of a cave, and inside this cave they have like a place for you to sit and you can practice.
Mm.
And I'm sitting in this cave, and up until then I'd had just could not get momentum happening in my practice. A lot of stuff coming up from my past, a lot of things to deal with. It was quite difficult. Like every day, I'm like, I should just leave. It was the condition. I mean, there was not there was only one toilet with running water, so a lot of like using
Drop
drop
toilets. Yep.
toilets, and there wasn't like there's no heater or air conditioning in your room. I'm in like a little wooden hut. This little Vietnamese man I was with, he would sort of light a fire, and then he left, so I had no fire. I didn't know how to light a fire. I was like, no one told me I didn't learn it. I'd wear like 3-4 pairs of socks just to stay warm. I was not a fan of the fasting. Like, it was just rough.
Jeez.
But anyway, many days in, I finally started getting some bit of progress, whatever. And also the monks there, they were doing a construction project, so they were not interested in trying to help me sort my shit out. They got massive drills and shit. And I'm trying to meditate. They're banging steel on steel, which is a very meditative sound.
Yeah. Yeah. Fucking hell.
I'm in this fucking cave, and all of a sudden it was raining. It's like, and I quite enjoy the sound of rain, just light rain. And all of a sudden I felt like a drop of water, and it kind of ran down my nose. And then it started running up my nose. And I was like, oh,
Jeez.
that doesn't usually happen.
Yeah.
Like, it was quite severe. And I was trying not to become like, whoa, enamored. I opened my eyes again, and I just sort of sat with the experience. And then this just sort of went up and down, and it went on. And then before long, I started to have like extremely pleasant feelings, a lot of love, metta, like a lot of very nice, comfortive, very powerful feeling went to arise. It was really powerful. A lot of those experiences are really powerful, and I think it's the goal isn't just to have powerful, pleasant experiences.
Nah.
Those are, because it's more about freedom, but those are definitely nice to have along the way.
Yeah, you need that reward. You need.
Yes.
You've got to have. You're sure you've got that persistence of self, and you understand that there is going to be that reward, but we inevitably have to experience that pleasure for the value of the pain that we process through it. So
yeah, absolutely.
No, that's really interesting, really cool. I'm just imagining a monk with a jackhammer. It's a great visual. Just a guy, orange road.
It was great. We'd be felling trees. I remember one time we're felling trees. These guys are wearing like sandals and thongs. This guy's got a chainsaw. He's on the tree that he's chopping down. And then I'm holding onto a rope. Me and a bunch of other guys, we're holding onto this rope, trying to pull the tree towards us. And I remember the monk, he like tapped me on the shoulder. He's like, go behind me. I was like, why? He goes, oh, I don't want to argue with your mum about why the tree fell on the kid. So I was like, all right. So it was nuts. It was an amazing time though. I mean, it's awesome to be able to dedicate. Like, if I want to do jiu-jitsu full time or comedy full time, it's on me to like try to figure out how to set up my life. But if you want to meditate full time, you can just go to one of these monasteries, become a monk.
Yeah.
And that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
It's pretty freaking remarkable that they've set up an organization with a structure where you can live and eat and have housing and meditate full time. That's awesome. Like,
yeah, that's great. That's great as a concept.
Yeah.
But it's a commitment.
Oh, it's a huge commitment. Like there's 200, I think, 80 rules in the Vinaya, or the code of conduct for the monks, and shaved head, and like, you're a complete celibate. You're all the food that you eat has to be given to you, so you can't just go procure food and whatnot. So if
Right.
people don't come to feed you, you're not eating. It's quite a lot of it's an incredible commitment. But the amount of respect that the Theravadan Buddhists have for the monks
Yeah.
is immense. Yeah,
Just
yeah.
goes to show that freedom ain't free. You've got
Oh
280
yeah,
rules.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But one of the things I did want to talk to you about is because, yeah, you've gone to a Buddhist practice, you've got this Sikh background.
Mm,
I guess for me, I'm very interested in understanding the cultural acceptance of, spiritual practices in the culture, particularly if you are from India and having these backgrounds, because obviously this, Buddhism, Sikhism, or particularly Buddhism, is
yeah,
born in this, in
that's
India.
right.
And,
Yeah,
the Western approach to spirituality, is often gimmicked and marketed, and it isn't until
mm,
like more integrated purists like, Alan Watts with Taoism,
yes,
and,
yes,
like if you
yes,
go Joseph Goldstein's when it comes to meditation,
yes,
normalizing that process because, I think there is so much that we need to deconstruct socially from the Western
yeah,
world, to allow
yeah,
that richness of self to be amplified in the observation through Eastern spirituality.
yeah,
And that's one of the, and that's often what people find is that you see those fluffy spiritual people that you see, white
yeah,
dudes with
yeah, yeah,
dreadlocks and mums with
yeah,
crystals
yeah,
versus
yeah.
the genuine approach to identifying or de-identifying with the self and how
Yes.
accepted that is, right? It's just
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
it's just like similar to how we're going through this wave of mental health awareness and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
I think alongside that, as a common practice is the practice of mindfulness. But that even seems like it's been kind of boxed or whitewashed in from meditation because people
Yes.
couldn't understand the concept of meditation because, A, it
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily well explained.
Mm-hmm.
But they've westernized the concept of it to make it more functional and more outcome
Mm-hmm.
oriented. Well, that's my perspective on it anyway. But,
Yeah.
I guess the question is to you is how you've obviously integrated into the East and the West like I have. Is
Yeah.
there a is there more inclination or more acceptance to be a more spiritual being and more observant, or more observant being in your family and culture, and are they just willingly just that, oh, I'm going on a 10-day retreat, yeah, cool, see you in a bit.
For sure. For sure. I think especially within India itself. So you talked about Sikhism, Buddhism,
Mm,
and Hinduism and Jainism as well. This is sort of the they call it the Dharmic family of religions. So just as you have the Abrahamic family religions, there's the Dharmic family of religions. There's a lot of these ascetics
mm,
running around over there. Sadhus who they're full time like consciousness explorers, and then there is a societal system which these guys they go up to a house and they beg for alms and the people support them,
mm,
and then there's different sort of temples and places they can go stay and travel around on pilgrimage and do these things. So there's more of a system around these things. And I think there's some understanding, even if people, because I guess the other thing that comes with this is you kind of take it for granted. I guess if it's just in your culture where it may not interest you as much, or a lot of people in the East, they just want to be like the West.
mm.
They just want to they they think it's corny or whatever to engage in a lot of their spiritual traditions, and they just want to look like the Hollywood actors or the singers and celebrities, and they're taken in by the Kardashians or whatever,
Mm, mm.
So it's interesting to observe the problems, in the East, especially with this increasing sort of Western influence over there. With, you know, for them too, a lot of it's becoming just accrue wealth and
Yeah,
wear designer brands and even eat McDonald's because it's like, wow, it's different and it's
yeah,
exotic, and everyone kind of wants to be what they're not.
yeah,
you know it's like in India, to have darker skin is considered not so good. People put on whitening
Whitening
cream, whatever,
cream
and
and
over
all that
here
sort of
everyone
stuff.
wants to tan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of funny. It goes back to the mind.
Mm.
The mind seeks problems, and the mind is so good at generating discontent with however things are.
Yeah,
When you're in Sydney, you want to be in Austin. When you're in Austin, you want to be in Sydney. Like
yeah, yeah.
you're all over the shop.
Mm.
But yeah, there's definitely I think for the people who have, like, as a child, one of the ways like I connected with my grandfather and even my great grandmother is I'd sit with them while they were praying or contemplating or chanting with them and stuff. So it's a good way to sort of connect with your family and sort of it's like it gives you some framework
Mm.
of having a spiritual connection or having some form of spirituality for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
interesting.
it. Hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, it's going to be funny to see when they come full circle, and that's I was going to ask
Yeah,
is that yes, India is becoming particularly Americanized or Westernized, and yeah, they are in pursuit of all of the trappings of Western society, and they're going to
mm,
realize how fruitless it is, and how it just as
yeah,
empty as the existence they had pre it, and they're going to come back full
yeah.
circle.
That's
Um,
right.
and that's going to be interesting to see. But yeah, it's funny that you talk about that spirituality practice connected to your family because I didn't necessarily have that because I was
Mm,
raised Muslim, but my dad was not religious. My dad was
I see.
my mum was Christian. My mum didn't
Wow.
convert. And like you're talking before about having these practices of spirituality and religion within your family, I didn't really have that, but I was still
Wow.
expected somehow to be Muslim, right, and to have that
Yeah.
understanding.
Interesting.
Like for the longest time, like I don't speak Urdu. I had to
Wow.
read an English version of the Quran, and I was terrible at that
Wow.
too. I still don't really know how to pray properly, and I've been,
Wow.
and that's what I mean. So I've been entirely disconnected from the ritual of religion in
Yeah.
for a long time. And ironically, since and then that's come from the external pursuit of God in the
Mm,
cultural norm of where I was brought into. But because I was at this
yeah.
intersection of different, in Australia, two different cultures, not having an example of a religious practice in my day to day life, yeah, I didn't grow up necessarily religious
Yeah.
and connected to Allah and connected to God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ironically, it is in this practice of self and this and realigning of myself, aligning with it, this spiritual connection to the greater source and what have you, the term of God in whatever form you want to put it. It's
Hmm.
only now that my connection to the higher power has been larger
Wow.
than it has ever before. And I inherently
Wow.
believe in it, integrated it into myself more than ever. But
Yeah.
that had to come from an individualistic practice and observation of myself, pull away the layers of ego and suffering that raise the frequency
Yeah.
to the connection to the higher power.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just wonder what kind of person I would have been if I
Wow.
had that integrated into me at a younger
Yeah.
age.
Yeah. Yeah.
But would it? I question whether it would be necessarily what I would have wanted because then I would
It
probably
would
have.
have been both.
Yeah, because then I would have
Mm,
also taken in a lot more of the religious teachings
that's right.
that
Yeah.
that came with Islam, which I don't necessarily
Yeah.
agree with now,
Yeah.
particularly
Yeah. Yeah.
being in the Western world. Sure, it's not
And I'm the
perfect,
same. Yeah.
but there is some benefit to the integration of both, and that there is much to be
Mm,
said about the progression of religion and religion ideals to keep it relevant in today's society.
yeah. There's a great Punjabi Sufi poet, and the Sufis, as you likely know, the sort of more
Mm,
mystical side of Islam.
yeah.
He, his name is Bulle Shah. He talks about. He goes, if you would find God by being in the mosque, then all the salamanders and little insects in the mosque would have found God.
Mm,
And he talks to the same thing about the Hindus believe a lot about bathing and purifying yourself in these particular rivers and different pilgrimage sites. He goes, well, then the fish and the turtles,
mm,
they would have found God,
yeah.
but they haven't.
Yeah.
And some people believe you have to get up early to pray. And he goes, yeah, well, the dogs, the dogs get up real early in the morning, and, the
Yeah.
roosters, but they don't have God. So it's
Mm.
it's interesting. It's the same. Like I got a lot of. I mean, I definitely got benefit from, especially from going to the temple and sort of understanding those things or whatever. But there was a lot of ego that got solidified as a result of thinking that I was better than other people who were not as observant in the faith as me.
Mm.
That I was better than people who didn't have a faith at all. And I was completely oblivious to how destructive those things were to me. So that there was a lot of negative I got from that, and even especially, I guess when I got older and I listened to more guys like Hitchens and Harris Dawkins,
Mm.
and I sort of began to deconstruct a lot of those ideas that I was raised with. For a time, I was completely disenchanted with the idea of spirituality or anything in general. I had a very materialist worldview, and that's the problem, I guess, when if you're sucked into like an Osho cult or some sort of religious ideology that later doesn't agree with you, you can become completely disenchanted with the whole spiritual project in general
Mm.
and assume that there's nothing of value there.
Mm.
And that can be that's like going into do martial arts and you get sucked into ninjutsu
Yeah.
and you're fucking you don't learn anything of value when you get beat up by a football player. Suddenly you think there's no value in pursuing martial arts at all,
Yeah.
and that these are not a means for defending yourself at all. So
Mm.
that is quite dangerous. It is quite dangerous.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned Sufism. I actually just finished a book called Living Presence, which basically
Wow.
conceptualizes the idea of Sufism. And it is very spiritual and, it is a
Mm-hmm.
more mystical form of Islam, which actually has a lot of
Mm-hmm.
correlations to any of the other more Eastern philosophies, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It has similarities to the Tao. We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
the constant presence of oneness and who we are, and the collective of the God and God particle, what that is, even
Yeah.
with Buddhism,
Yeah.
and the idea of,
Sikhism too.
yeah, and that's one of the commonalities and the patterns that I see is that when you peel away the the rigidity of the rules around how you worship or recognize God,
Yeah.
you get more connected to the presence of the omnipotence of it, of the
Yeah.
omnipresence of it.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's interesting to see. It also raises the question of the role of, like, just like you said, the
Mm.
ego the ego maintaining a presence over the spiritual layer of that connection to God and to others, because you've got this superiority perspective.
Wow.
And you see these, you think about, like, for example, like, think about like Saudi Arabia, right? That
Yeah. Yeah.
everyone's Muslim in the Middle East, but
Yeah.
the Sunnis and the Shias, they're fighting and they're pushing
Yeah.
the
Oh yeah.
Sufis out, and that's not God.
Not at
That
all.
is ego. That is power.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is that hierarchy of who you are.
Oh yeah.
And it's, the ego has infected those structures, and it's not holy in any sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to connect you with a very close friend of mine, Sam
Yeah.
Akemba. He's the guy I mentioned earlier, the MMA fighter, and because when I got into meditation, I sort of kind of forced a lot of the close friends of mine to sort of come along with me,
Yeah.
and he's done a lot of that. He's familiar with waking up and has a practice of his own, and he's also sort of speaking. A lot of what you're saying sounds familiar to me because I've been hearing it from him. Because he's got a Muslim background, and his father's African Muslim from Uganda, but his mother was actually Malaysian Buddhist.
Ah.
So he's got this same like you, this interesting blend of cultures,
Mm.
and he's done some real remarkable things. He's one of the best pros in his weight division in the country, and now he's starting. He's been telling me recently about he's gone back to doing a lot of the Muslim practices and praying and doing things. His father was actually like a cleric, like taught um, uh, sort of Muslim studies, and it's interesting for him sort of integrating this because he's the same, like he doesn't just it's not as simple as just being a Muslim for him, but he's bringing in sort of mindfulness practices with his other practices.
Mm.
So I think it'd be good to connect you two, especially since he's in that martial arts sort of space. He actually did comedy. He's one of the reasons I did comedy.
Really?
I was gonna go to the Adams Room in Collingwood. I'm not remembering the name, on Smith Street.
Oh,
the kebab shop.
what, Dirty? Dirty Secrets?
Dirty! How the hell did I forget that? That's when you know I'm getting affected.
Yeah.
I was Dirty Secrets. I heard about this room because there's a fella came from America who's like a coach. I was telling him a story. He's doubled over laughing. And I had this sort of moment where I'm looking at him, looking at this other guy who's listening. They're all laughing so hard. I'm like, this happens a lot. I'm telling a story or whatever, and I'm either addressing a group of people or people are laughing. And I sort of had this thing in my mind because I've been listening to the Diaz podcast, I've been listening to Joey, and I even had a whiteboard where I would plan my jiu-jitsu stuff on. And on the top right-hand corner, in a little lowercase, I put like a little C. And I was even afraid to write "try comedy" because it sounds so ridiculous to me. But I put a little lowercase C.
Yeah.
And I finally decided after that moment, I was like, look, there's no reason why I can't do an open mic once a week for 10 years.
Yeah.
And something will happen, you know?
Yeah.
Whatever. Plant the seed, water it. And I sort of rang him that day. I was supposed to prepare. I didn't really prepare anything, whatever. And I remember I woke up and I was like, oh shit, I'm late to this place. And I went to go pick him up. So I rang him. Hey, you want to come watch me do comedy? He's like, yeah, sweet, I'll come along. I picked him up. He was at a job. He was doing some sort of job, but he can't hold a job down to save his life. He's like, I'll just walk out with it. I just rocked up to the place. He just jumped in my car.
Yeah.
We head there. And at first, because one of the reasons I went to pick him up is on purpose. I thought I'd be late and I'd miss the sign-up period.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to see
sabotage yourself.
I was trying to sabotage it.
Yeah.
And Dane, my housemate, got there early. He was like, hey, Bobby, they're about to end sign-up, but I can just put your name down.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, no, don't put my name down yet. Let me get there. And he gave the phone to Adam. And I speak to Adam. And Adam was like, oh, hey, cuz, you're going to come do comedy? I'm like, oh, look, I don't know yet. Let me just rock up, whatever.
Yeah.
So I rock up. And I saw just the empty chairs.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's going to be people in these chairs. I don't want those people to see me on stage. I don't want to do this. So I turned around to Sam. I was like, look, the first one I'm going to watch.
Yeah.
Maybe next time I'll get on. And he looks at me, he goes, what? He goes, you know what? I'm going to put my name down.
Yeah.
So Sam went and put his name down on the list.
Wow.
And then I felt so so then I put my name down because of him.
That's great.
And he actually did comedy before I ever did comedy. So it was pretty fun. And he was actually funnier than I was that night. Like, I mean, it's his first time, but he told the story about his dad.
He's not attached to the outcome like you are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And that what you just hit on, that is so much of a better way to live life is to be unattached to outcomes and not want specific outcomes. Right? It doesn't have to be, I have to win this match. It's like, no, what can I control? I can control my preparation, you know, how well I train, all those things. And that way you remove a lot of that. You leave the rock where it's lying. You don't lift that rock and put it on your shoulders and think, oh, why am I carrying this rock? You know, it's like, put it down. You can put it down.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Look, I'm just conscious of time because this has got a 2-hour limit on it, so I will probably wrap it up there. But Bobby, thank you very much for being a part of this, man.
Thank you so much, brother.
It's a great conversation. Where can the people find you if they want to follow up on anything you said or what you do, since you're an average?
Yeah, so I have Instagram. So my name, Bobby Sandhu, and then just BJJ.
Yeah.
I'm doing a bit of teaching stuff in regards to jiu-jitsu. I've got some seminars booked in Newcastle, hopefully Sydney, and potentially Melbourne as well.
Yeah.
So just sort of stay in the loop for that if you're interested in learning some jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, man. For all intents and purposes, Bobby's an absolute weapon at it. He is the Indian Anderson Silva, from what I understand. Just limbs and fucking danger. And let me ask you this though, like, are you even in BJJ if you don't put BJJ into your social handles?
Yeah, I did it a bit prematurely. I was like a blue belt when I threw the BJJ in there. But,
man, everyone. That's how I can tell. They just love putting in their names. My goodness. It's such an integral part of their identity. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, that or MMA.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's what they love. But yeah,
That's it.
but awesome. Thanks a lot for your time, Bobby. It's great to chat, and we'll
Thank
catch up
you,
again soon.
Jameel.
And to
Have a
everyone,
good one.
thanks a lot. If you want to see me, check out Aussie Comedy Network on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You know who I am already. Footscray Comedy Club for gigs. And we'll see you next week with another chat. Thank you. See you later.